I think we can start. Everybody, welcome back to our second webinar of the day. And for those who are just joining us, welcome to the DSC DACH Tech Tutorials. Our next tutorial will be held by Erik Ternav from IBM Slovenia. He is a data and AI partner, technical specialist, and he will tell us more about generative AI for businesses. I'm sure you will enjoy this webinar as well. And well, if you have any questions, you can use Q&A chat and we'll answer them at the end of this webinar. So enjoy.
Okay. I guess that's my cue. Thank you very much for the introduction. You can hear me, right? Hopefully. Okay, good. My name is Erik Ternav. I'm work at IBM. I've been working for IBM for the last 3 years. And ever since I came to IBM, I've been basically working with AI, machine learning, and similar technologies. Now, ever since the whole, let's say, trend or revolution or however you want to call it, that involved generative AI came about, I started working with generative AI tools. So that was about 2 years ago, I think, right? And IBM's response to the whole generative AI story that's been going on is with a product which is called Watson X. Now, Watson X is, in a couple of words, it's a platform for not just generative AI, but for AI in general, so that businesses can leverage and infuse AI use cases into their business processes. And that's something that I'm going to be talking about today. Now, I currently work as a data and AI partner technical specialist, and the main thing I do is I enable our partners so that they can sell our products, they can implement their products, and so on and so forth. So I work in pre-sales essentially, and I have a lot of, let's say most of my time, it's face-to-face. I communicate with our partners and try to make their lives a lot easier. So in consequence, they make my life a lot easier because, they sell more stuff. Now, I covered the data and AI portfolio, as I mentioned before. And in the past, before I came to this client-facing role, I worked as in a team we called client engineering in IBM, and I also worked with AI products, but we were focusing on creating different POCs / MVPs or pilot projects for our clients. Okay, so pilot projects, MVPs, related to generative AI in different sectors, different domains, from insurance to banking to government entities, telco, and so on and so forth. So I have a couple of experience. I have some experiences when it comes to these projects and what the current trends are, and I'd be happy to share with you today. So depending on the time, let's see where we end up, right? So with that aside, generative AI for businesses. The content for today, so I decided to divide the entire thing into 4 different parts. The first part, let's say, I'm going to waste, let's say, 30 minutes on a PowerPoint. I have a couple of slides, which, I'm going to start with a couple of slides related to more sales-ish approach to set the stage into what I'm going to show you later on. Then the second part is a demonstration. I'm going to demonstrate the technology so you can see for yourself how to operate it and get a better understanding of what IBM brings to the table. Then for part number 3, I'm going to wrap things up. I'm going to spend 5 to 10 minutes, and that's pretty much it. And I'm going to leave 15 to 10 minutes in the end for Q&A, just in case if anyone has a question or we can have a discussion, and that's the end of that. Now, let me jump into the PowerPoint. So impact of generative AI in the next 3 years. Okay, so I mentioned before, I'm going to have a couple of slides to sort of like set the stage. And I'm sure that most of you, considering you're at this conference, most of you understand that generative AI brings a lot to the table, in a sense that this people that work in this area are going to have a busy time in the next decade and even later on, because there's a lot of money going into the from a business standpoint, a lot of businesses are investing into generative AI and AI in general, and also a lot of research is getting funded, which is based on Gen AI. So this is an area which is growing extremely rapidly. It's really almost impossible to keep up, right? So here we have the global economic boosts. We have 3.3 to 4 trillion forecasted economic benefits in the next 3 years. Then also massive early adoption. So 81% of enterprises are working with or planning to leverage foundational models and adopt generative AI. Okay, so in a business sense, to give you an understanding, doesn't matter what the business domain is. If the business won't successfully integrate generative AI into their use cases, they're going to have a hard time competing with the businesses that do successfully integrate generative AI, because this brings such an advantage to the table when it comes to productivity in, let's say, in the mid to long run, that it's going to be really hard to compete, right? So that's why there's a lot of that's why there's a lot of hype going on, and most of businesses, especially big companies, understand that they need to be extremely successful with the implementation of these use cases, and also for small businesses as well. Okay, so then we have broad reaching and deep impact. So 7% potential rise in global GDP within 10 years. I mentioned this before. So, the chances, the opportunities are, there's a lot of opportunities, and also it's the amount of money that's getting invested into Gen AI is also quite high. And then critical focus on AI investment. So 70% of software vendors integrate Gen AI in their enterprises application by 2026. And this is related to the thing I mentioned before, which is if you're not going to invest, then you probably won't be able to compete, which means you probably most likely are going to go out of business. That's the unfortunate reality of things. So that's why everyone is trying to get a piece of the cake. Now, generative AI, and now the most frequently deployed AI solutions, right? So sorry about that. So when people in the last 2 years, there's been quite some changes. So I remember 2 years ago when I was talking with clients in regards to AI and artificial intelligence, and in general, the first thing that came to mind was traditional machine learning and traditional data science. But since the whole hype with starting with ChatGPT and all of these large language models that came about 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, then the meaning of the word changed a bit. So whenever you say AI, everyone immediately jumps into the generative AI. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And even from a point of view of what clients really want now, they switched priorities. Gen AI is it's on the number one spot when it comes to what they actually mean by when they want to infuse AI into their business. So traditional AI, machine learning, it's on the second. It's not a priority compared to, let's say, the Gen AI. So that's something that's a good idea to keep in mind. Which doesn't mean that traditional AI and traditional machine learning is not popular anymore. It just took a hit, and Gen AI is the new, let's say, big kid on the block. Okay, so here we have a piece of information, which is 29% of organizations in the US, Germany, and the UK have deployed and are using Gen AI, and 34% primarily utilize Gen AI embedded in existing application as the top way of fulfilling Gen AI use cases. So they embed Gen AI into their application, into their business processes. In Germany, US, and UK already have a head start. Now, considering I covered the Eastern Europe territory, I can actually see what the difference is, let's say, when these trends usually come a bit late in Eastern Europe. We're usually at least one year behind the curve. Okay, so due to multiple reasons, but this was this is a story that was quite popular in US, Germany, and UK, and it launched off even, you know, a year and a half ago. And in EET, everyone was a little bit more skeptical, right? So in Eastern European territory, businesses were a lot more skeptical, and they waited because they didn't want to make let's say, decisions which would cost them a lot of money. But now everyone understood that this is a huge opportunity, a huge plus. So this is, let's say, 2025 is going to be the opportunity for Eastern Europe for sure, because everyone is investing, everyone is budgeting right now, and they would like a piece of the cake. Also, a problem in the past was that the languages weren't supported to the extent they are supported right now, right? So the large language models weren't that good when it comes to working with languages such as, you know, in my case, Slovenian, then Croatian, Romanian, and so on and so forth. But now that's not the issue, because we got, you know, more models every day coming out which know the language extremely well. So again, the entire thing is evolving extremely fast, and it's a matter of time before people latch onto it. So here's some of the most common use cases which are currently, they aren't as flashy, but there's something that the clients can implement as soon as possible, and you see the results instantly. So summarization, you know, conversation summaries, insurance coverage, meeting transcripts, contract information. So summarizing information, essentially. This is extremely useful and a good, good and simple use case to start with in a business. Classification, sorting of customer complaints, threat and vulnerability classification, sentiment analysis, and customer segmentation. Then we have generation, probably the most frequent, you know, through, let's say, retrieval augmented generation, the architecture that's the most popular in, I would say, every region, right? Usually when we're talking about generative AI, everyone wants to implement a RAG use case, RAG. So marketing campaigns, job descriptions, blog posts, articles, email drafting support, and so on and so forth. Then we have extraction, such as, you know, for use cases as medical diagnosis support, research findings, and so on and so forth. And then we have question answering, which is in most cases in a form of a chatbot. You have a large language model, you tune it, and then you infuse it in a chatbot, you connect it with a chatbot, and then you have it either for internal purposes, for your employees, or for your customers for external purposes, so your customers can have a conversation with the model. Okay, this is also something that's quite that's gaining a lot of traction in the territory that I cover. So then we have code generation and translation. This is straightforward. So for developers, for programmers, so they have an easier time with their work, so they don't have to waste time searching for different codes. You know, just it's a huge time saver in general. Also, the translation of the codes for, I don't know, IBM has the translation from COBOL to Java, then we have Ansible, and so on and so forth. So for types of codes that are not that mainstream and are more specific, okay, depending on the industry. And of course, the final one is language translation, which is quite kind of straightforward, okay? So usually when businesses want to implement something like this, they usually pick a couple of these use cases and they implement them, you know, anywhere they want, because it's not a domain specific use case, let's say. But these are quite general, and they can aid every single, let's say, employee or customer, and which is not tied to a certain industry. Okay. So maybe, okay. So this is essentially, this is the generative AI stack that a business needs to have to let's say to run their own to have their own generative AI and traditional AI use cases, so they can implement them in their business. So of course, these are, let's say, the four building blocks, right? And these are the solutions that IBM brings to the table. So let's start with the infrastructure. Okay, so a company needs to have an infrastructure, or, you know, in the case of Watson X, let's say, whether they want to have the software on premise, or whether they want to have it in a hybrid cloud environment, or whether they want to have it in the cloud altogether, we have, watsonx brings all of these options to the table. Okay, so IBM's approach is a hybrid cloud approach. So doesn't matter what the preference is, you can have it on premise for, let's say, banks or insurances who are a little bit more skeptical where their data is stored, or let's say for retail or something like that, who don't really care that much. That's not really the best. I didn't pick the right words, but it's a little bit less regulated and they can have their things in the cloud. Now everything is running on Red Hat OpenShift, which is also a huge plus. Then we have the foundational models. So watsonx has a lot of foundational models to choose from. So it's an important thing to keep in mind is that IBM does not plan to build one big model, invest into one model that will be infused into every use case. Our approach is a little bit different. We believe that the future is, let's say, you have multiple models, okay? You have a lot of models to choose from, and then pick the best model for a certain use case. So let's say a business would have 10 different models to choose from, and they would have different models for different use cases, and these models would be usually smaller, which means they're a lot cheaper compared to the bigger models, and trained on specific data. Okay, so they won't, the chances of them hallucinating will be smaller, and so on and so forth. And overall, it's going to be a lot more efficient. Now, I'm gonna leave it at that because I'm gonna go a little bit more deeper later on in the demonstration. I'm gonna show you what we're gonna have a couple of more minutes just on this topic, but let's go further. Then we have the generative AI platform. So here we have three main components of watsonx. The watsonx.ai, this is the one that we're going to be focusing on today. This is essentially a studio and where all of the magic happens. So imagine you have data scientists. They're going to be able to pick the models in the studio. They're going to be able to prompt tune them, to fine tune them, to prompt engineer them, play around with them, and see, use different templates and see which model best suits the use case. And then essentially this is where all of the heavy work comes into play. And also you have other tools that for traditional machine learning and traditional AI. So we're going to go over them briefly later on. And then we have two other components. So the second one is watsonx governance. Watsonx governance, by the way, is going to be extremely, most of you are familiar with the EU AI Act, so the piece of legislation that's already has been signed, but it's going to be enforced next year. So this part of the product is going to be quite relevant next year because in 2025 it's going to be enforced. And then, so it's essentially a tool that allows you to govern your AI, and generative as well as traditional AI. And then we have watsonx data, which is a data lakehouse. Here you have a vector database for the retrieval augmented generation use case, as well as you can store all your data. And then finally at the top, we have the assistants, which you can create your own chatbot. You can create, let's say, an assistant for code generation, and then we have for saving time with business processes, and so on and so on, so on and so forth. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this area because it can go on for hours. But essentially, again, I'm going to be most of the time I'm going to be talking about watsonx.ai, which is the focus of today's presentation. But I want to highlight one thing is that watsonx is a modular platform, and it's best described as a set of building blocks. Okay, so every business, if you can imagine, they have their own needs, and based on their needs, based on what they want to implement, they would pick certain modules inside of watsonx, which solves their problem. So they don't need to buy everything. They don't need to buy, it's not rigid. So they buy depending on how they want to deploy the platform, but essentially you pick what you need, right? And watsonx AI is the main component. So IBM watsonx.ai generative AI tool. So let's go over the tools real quick before I start the demonstration. So essentially, IBM watsonx.ai, you can build, train, validate, tune, and deploy models. Okay, so again, this is where the heavy hitting comes into place. This is where the data scientists or the prompt engineers, or however you want to call them, play around with models. They pick the model that's best suited for a certain use case. They test different models, how they respond in different scenarios. And then in the end, once they're done testing, they pick the correct model, which is then also trained on top of documents. They can, you know, they can test it again and so on and so forth. But essentially, once they are done building the model and training the model, then they can validate the model, whether or not it's acting accordingly. And then if not, they can, you know, fine tune it, prompt tune it, so on and so forth. They can go back and forth. Essentially, here is where you come with the final model that you infuse into an application, into let's say a business process, whatever. Okay, but this is where all the magic happens. Now, here we have 4 different components. We have the foundational model library, we have prompt lab, tuning studio, and the track AI models component. Now, this is the governance component, but I'm not going to be talking about this today. So we're going to start with the foundational model library. Now, a couple of words again regarding what's IBM's approach to generative AI. So IBM's approach is there's going to be businesses are going to use multiple models inside of their business for different use cases. Now, why is this a good thing, and why does this approach make sense? So, you know, some vendors go with, you know, they want to train one model that's going to be this huge model who's trained on massive amounts of data, and they're going to infuse it into every use case. Now, why is that not such a good idea? The reason for that is that the first reason is if the model is, the bigger it is, the pricier it is. Okay, so if again, give an example from an on-premise deployment, we had an example here a couple of weeks ago. For a huge model, you would need, let's say, four to 5 different GPUs. Okay, whether for a smaller model, you might need 1 to 2, usually 1. You know, a medium model is 2 GPUs, but usually you need for a large model 4 GPUs, which is, they're not really that, you know, they're not the NVIDIA, what are they, E100 or whatever. It doesn't really matter, but they're quite expensive, right? So that's one thing to keep into account. Maybe for one model is not an issue, but if you were to have, you know, like 5 different models, you know, it's a lot of money from an on-premise deployment. And let's say from a point of view of having it on the cloud, it's also quite expensive because one API call is a lot more, you know, if you were to use a certain amount of tokens, it's a lot more expensive compared to if you were to use the same amount of tokens from a smaller model. Okay, so price is the first thing. The second is if you have a model that's trained on the entirety of the internet and you use it for different use cases, then the chances of it hallucinating are a lot higher. They, you know, which hallucinations are never good because they have consequences, whether that's financial, um, whether it harms the, let's say, the image of the company and so on and so forth. So if you have smaller models that are trained specifically for certain domains, that the chances of them hallucinating are a lot smaller. Okay, so price, then efficiency, as well as, of course, you need a lot small, you know, smaller amounts of hardware and so on and so forth. So what IBM brings to the table, here we can see that we have the foundational model library. Okay, and these are all the models that we have at our disposal right now. So we have IBM models, for example, the Granite series, which are trained on curated data. Okay, so all of the data they were trained on is, you know, curated. It's not, you can make sure that the data wasn't stolen, it wasn't taken from someone else, and they're trusted, they're performant, and they're really cost effective because they're small and they were trained on, if I'm not mistaken, they're specifically trained on insurance and the financial industry, basically, right? So financial industry, so for the financial businesses, such as banks and insurances, this is the Granite model, the perfect model to have, okay? Because they're small, cost effective, and so on and so forth. Then we have open source and third-party models. So open source, such as Google Flan or the Llama from Meta, right? So Llama all the way up to 3.1, which is extremely good in EET languages, and it's performing really, really well. And we also have the OEM partner models such as Mistral. Mistral is also it's quite interesting because it's quite small, and it also performs really, really well in EET languages such Slovenian, Croatian, you know, the list goes on and on and on. Now, we also have a Hugging Face partnership, and you will be able to bring your own model to the mix. So if it's going to have a certain architecture, and if it's going to be deployed on Hugging Face, you will be able to take the model from Hugging Face and then use it for your own needs. Okay, this is essentially the main let's say goal of this functionality. So that's also an option. Now let's go to the second part. So we have the Prompt Lab. Okay, so Prompt Lab, this is the other tool. And inside Prompt Lab, this is the studio part of it. So we have three different options to choose from, right? The Prompt Lab has three modes. So first is the chat mode. So provides conversational interaction with LLM. So this is sort of like if you were to open ChatGPT, you can converse with the chat, it remembers the history, and you can pick the model you want to converse with. Then we have the structured mode, which has certain templates you can use for different use cases. It's extremely good for, let's say, for users that want to get started with prompt engineering and test out different templates, and then infuse them into their business processes. And then the third part is the freeform. So this is more for experienced users to apply prompt tuning best practices for their use case. So freeform essentially is not as rigid. You have open arms, you can do whatever you want. Okay. So chat, this is how it looks like. You have quick start samples you can test out, or you can just type in a question or whatever comes to mind. And here in the top, you can change the model. Then we have the structured part. Here are the different templates you can choose. So we have generation, question answering, marketing, so on and so forth. And you get a template. What's the word I'm looking for? You essentially get a template here you can fill in, and then based on what you fill in, you would get a response that, you know, you can try few shot prompting, you know, zero shot prompting, whatever, and then you can change it to the free form, or rather, sorry, my bad, I'm skipping a step. And you also have on the right side, you can provide examples and assistance for using generative AI in your code and application. So you get snippets of the prompts in either curl, Node.js, or Python. Okay, and then also you have the freeform version, which I talked about before, which is you have a lot of freedom. You can freeform test the models and see how they behave. Okay, this is a bit more for a bit more experienced say prompt engineers, but you get the hang of it quite easily. Then when it comes to tuning the model, okay, so let's say retrieval augmented generation, this approach is quite popular nowadays. I mean, this is the most popular approach when it comes to generative AI, at least from my experience, and I think elsewhere as well, based on what my colleagues tell me. Okay, but there's also, I'm not going to go into what retrieval augmented generation is, because I think most of you already know, but it's essentially, let's say, imagine you have a lot of documents and you pick a model and you train the model with the documents, and the end result is that you would get a ChatGPT question and answering application that's able to give you answers based on the documents that you trained it upon, right? So this is functionality wise, this is how it would look like. Technically, it's a little bit different. It works in a different manner. You don't actually train the model, but let's leave it at that. This is the most, let's say, popular approach to Gen AI use cases. But there's also some businesses, they want to either prompt tune the model, fine tune the model, or they want to use a different approach. So prompt tuning, essentially, this is also something watsonx AI brings to the table. You need label data, and you can train the model with label data. You don't need as much label data, and the model doesn't change in its essence. And it's a lot cheaper. I mean, it's a cheap approach, it's fast, and it's a good option for, let's say, smaller businesses and beginners that don't want to use retrieval augmented generation. Then we have fine-tuning. Fine-tuning is a similar approach, not quite, but the essence, you want to change the responses you get from the model. And it's a bit more, you need a lot of resources. It's a bit more pricey. I mean, actually, it's quite a lot more pricey. You need a lot of resources, as well as it changes the weights of the model. So you essentially change the model and drift it to, let's say, to the area that you want it to drift in, right? So essentially you change the weights, and then you get a different type of model in the end. But most businesses won't be doing this because it's not as efficient, at least right now. You tend to, it's extremely pricey, and the end result is, I don't think it's the best approach, except for certain use cases. But most businesses won't be doing the fine tuning. And then we have the Instruct Lab. Instruct Lab is a different approach to fine tuning. It's similar to fine tuning, but it's a cheaper approach. It uses, let's say, the knowledge of different SMEs from a community that all use Instruct Lab, and it's a lot cheaper compared to fine tuning, but you get sort of similar results, right? So these are all functionalities that are inside the watsonx.ai, or rather the fine-tuning one is on the roadmap. So then we have the tuning studio, right? So this is the prompt tuning thing I was talking about before. As you can see here, you can select the model, then you select which data you want to, the label data that you want to prompt tune the model with, and then you select what is your goal. So which use case do you want to fine tune it for? Prompt tune it, rather, my bad. It's either classification, generation, summarization. Then you get a prompt tune model in the end. The last tool I want to highlight is the synthetic data generation. So why is this important? Well, for businesses in general, especially from smaller businesses, it's a lot harder to get your hands on quality data, and data that you will be able to then use to train your models on. So with the synthetic data generation tool inside of watsonx.ai, you'll be able to generate your own data based on a small input of label data, right? So the data that you need to generate, huge amounts of data is quite small, and then the end result is, you get a lot more data, so then you can use it for training the model. So that's essentially the gist of it. And I think I've been talking too much, and the slides, I'm a little bit over the time with the slides, so I'm gonna just go straight up into the demonstration. Now, should I take a 5-minute break? Probably not, because I'm already, late. So essentially now I'm going to show you how the watsonx.ai platform looks like. Okay, here we can see this is the watsonx.ai platform in the IBM cloud. Again, we're not limited to the IBM cloud. You can also have it in AWS, you have it in Azure, you can have it on-premise, and it's running on Red Hat OpenShift. But for this demonstration, I use the light version inside of IBM Cloud, which is for free. And also, if anyone's interested, I'll be happy to help and show them how the entire thing can be implemented. And it's not actually an implementation; it's a couple of steps so that anyone can try the technology out. Now, as you can see, the moment I get in, I get greeted. So welcome to watsonx. And I have to agree to some terms, yada, yada, yada. And here I have a take a tour option, which is going to show me how, which are all the functionalities. But I'm going to click on X because I already did that. And I'm just going to do my own tour. Okay. So welcome, Erik. Here I have chat and build prompts with foundation models. Right from the get-go, have all multiple functionalities here. I can tune a foundational model with labeled data, or I can request or track models in AI use cases. Okay, so this is the governance part, which requires a different module. Okay, but I'm not going to be talking about today. I already mentioned these 3 times. I'm repeating myself, but essentially governance is also going to be something that's going to be important for every business that will take their AI strategy, necessary, that, seriously, rather. So here we have the resource hub. We have all of the assets, different assets that we have in watsonx.ai. We have featured information such as import custom foundational models, the new granite model, and so on and so forth, which are also, news basically, which are the things that are changing over time, and also what the community is looking at, and so on and so forth. We have deployment spaces, we have different projects. So we have different projects because we have, this is a platform where, in theory, businesses are going to have larger groups of people using it, and you need to be able to provide access management, and you do it through these projects. Okay, so here I have a DSC DACH project, which was created 13 hours ago. So I created it just for this demo. But if I go here in the hamburger menu, I click on view all projects, and it's going to take me to the project tab. Now here, for me to create a new project, let's say for a certain project for me and my team, I just go and click new project. I give it a name, description, tags. I have to connect it to an object storage, but I'm not going to do that because I already have a project created. Now I'm going to click on the project, the DSC project. And here you can see in the overview tab, I can add users and collaborators. I can add data to work with. I can chat and build prompts with foundational models, and I can tune the models with labeled data. Okay, then I have the history here. I have the resource usage in CUHs, and I have all the tokens that I spent. Okay, so based on this is how I'm going to get priced. Okay, so based on how much tokens that I spend and how many hours I essentially waste. Consume is the right word, right? So then also the governance part, the README, the project history. So essentially you have all the information when it comes to the project, what's happening, you have it in this tab. Then I'm gonna skip the asset tab because we're gonna check the last. Then we have the deployments. We have different deployments of different, let's say, machine learning models, Gen AI models. Then we can then connect to certain applications. Then we have all the jobs that are running, and also the manage tab, which has services integrations. This is where I can connect to all of the other modules. The resource usage, again, the different environments, then also access control. You can see I'm the only person in here now, but I can also add other collaborators, give them different roles such as admin, viewer, editor, and so on and so forth, and general information on the project and the platform itself. Now, let's go into the asset tab. Okay, so this is where the fun starts. So these are all the assets that I have in this project. Now, if I click on new assets, this is essentially the tools that I can use for my work. Okay, so here I can have, let's say, prepare data. So I can connect to different data sources. I can ground Gen AI with vectorized documents. I can prepare and visualize data. I can define reusable sets of parameters. I can then generate the synthetic data. Then I can automatically create machine learning models just based on what the data that they give them. So this is a nice one. I'm gonna show it later. Let's see, depending on how much time I have. But this is what we're gonna focusing on. So chat and build prompts with foundational models. And I'm gonna go ahead and click on it. We also have, of course, other options, but let's not waste too much time. And this is the chat window we've been talking about before. Okay, so this is the chat. I can chat with the model, but first here in the top right, I'm going to show you I can pick a different model. Okay, so I'm just going to click on view all foundational models. And if I click on reset filter, it's going to take me to, yeah, so these are all the models at my disposal. We can see it's Granite. We have Code Llama, which is for generating code. We have different Llama models. We have Mistral, we have Mixtral, we have Flan, and so on and so forth, right? And we can also here want to bring your own model. We can also add our own model to the mix from Hugging Face. But these are the models that are here out of the box, right? And for this presentation, let's pick, I don't know, a Llama model. Let's go with Llama 3 with 405 billion parameters. And as you can see, the moment I click on the model, we can see all of the metadata, how it was trained, hardware, software, intended use, training data, benchmark scores, and so on and so on. So a lot of metadata related to the model, okay? And also there's a, wait a minute, if I go to Granite also, I mentioned before, this is an IBM model. So this is, trained on curated data. We also have the training taxonomy, so how it was trained, and a lot more metadata because it's a lot more transparent and it's a lot more predictable, right? So then, this just transparency is extremely important, especially next year with all the legislations coming up. So businesses will have to be able to explain how they get certain outputs and where the data is coming from. Okay, so let's go with Llama 3405 billion parameters. So I'm going to select the model, and I have the model selected here at the top right. And now I can chat with the model essentially, right? So, hi, I am currently giving a demo for the DSC conference in Vienna. Please say hi to the audience. Okay, hello everyone, and then it's gonna go ahead and give a generic response. Now the thing here is it's a little bit slow because this is an instance of watsonx.ai, which is free to use. Okay, so it's for testing purposes, and again, it's for people, if anyone's interested, I'll be happy to give them the let's say instructions on how to test it out, but it's for testing purposes. So in a case of, let's say, if someone were to use something in production, the response rate would be a lot higher, naturally. So this is more to test the functionalities and not to test the performance. It's important to keep in mind. Now, here, let's say I have the upload documents option. So I can have an option to use the retrieval augmented generation and see how it would work on certain documents. So I click on upload documents. I click on add document. Then here I have to add the file. Okay, so I have a PDF ready. DSC Vienna. So this is the PDF. Click on create, and that's going to take some time. Now let me show you what the PDF is. So the PDF is why AI governance is a business imperative for scaling enterprise artificial intelligence. Okay, so essentially it's a white paper on AI governance and how it's crucial for businesses if they want to have and implement their AI strategy, right? So this is the DSC Vienna. I named it. So now if I give it a question, it's going to it understands the context of the document and it's going to give me an answer based on the document. So if I say, please summarize the document. I made a mistake here. I should have said, please summarize the document and make it brief, because then, it's gonna take some time, but it is what it is, right? So now it's summarizing the document and what the content is in the document. And also, if I were to ask with different questions based on the document, it would answer me with the context in mind. Okay, so here you can test different documents. You can see how retrieval augmented generation would work, let's say, in practice with this particular model. You can also change the model and see what the response would be if you were to give the document to a different model and what the response would be, whether or not it would be better than this one, and then you can pick the one that's most suited for this use case. Okay, now, I don't know, I can also, translate this to Chinese. I don't think this is actually okay, so it actually knows Chinese. I forgot to mention, to make it brief, because then, can stay here for hours, but essentially not hours, but, it takes quite a bit of time because it's not using a lot of resources because, again, it's a demo environment. So as you can see, then this is, how the Llama 3 with 405 billion parameter performs. But this is essentially to test it out. Okay, so I'm going to click on stop, and we're going to go into the second part, which is the structured part. Okay, and here I have different templates in the left. So we have summarization, classification, generation, extraction, question answering, code, translation, and more. And these are, coming, and more are, getting updated every month or two. So let's go with marketing email generation and see what the template has in store for us. So setup, here are the instructions. So we have to give the instructions to the model. So in this case, it generate a 5-sentence marketing message for a company with the given characteristics. And here we had 3 examples. Okay, so this would be few shot prompting. We give 3 examples, so the details and what the email would look like. And then here we have the option to try it out. And once we fill in all of these examples, then we click on generate, and we would get generated emails based on something that would be similar to these examples. Okay, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not going to try it because it's you can try it for yourself if you're interested, but let's go to the final part, which is the free form text. Now, again, this is not as rigid. You have a lot of freedom here, and it's mainly for people that already understand what they're doing, okay? And how this part works is, I don't know, if I pick the Llama, again, I pick a different Llama, I pick Llama 170 parameters. And essentially I type some text in, and then I click on generate, and it's going to generate what the second most probable response is in this case, right? So this is not a chat window, but most of you understand, most of you that are here probably understand this. This is a free-form approach, and you also have to add multiple prompts and so on and so forth. So then the final results behaves in a way that you want it to behave. Okay. So essentially the words that you type, then it's going to generate the next word that has the highest probability of being there relatively to what you already typed, relatively to historic text. Let's say that's a good explanation. Now, let's take a look at a couple of other things. So here we have prompt variables. We can see all the variables that we used. We can see the prompt text. We have the code snippets, right? So once we're done with the prompt, we can copy and paste some of these snippets, either in curl, Node.js, or Python, and use it for further usage. And then we have the model parameters. Okay, so here we have 2 options. We have either greedy or sampling. So greedy always selects words with the highest probability, while sampling to customize the variability of word selection. So sampling has a little bit more freedom, basically. The reason for that is, so there's pluses and minuses on both sides. If you want it to be greedy, then the chances of it hallucinating are extremely low, but the response is going to be a little bit more rigid. If you were to put it into sampling, then the response is a lot more, natural language-ish, if that makes sense. It's as if you were to get a response from a real-life human being, but the chances of it hallucinating are a bit higher because you give it a lot more freedom. Then we have the repetition penalty. You can then select how much the response, the minimum amount of tokens the response has to have, or the maximum amount of tokens it has to have. So if I were to turn here and sampling from greedy, here I have other parameters such as temperature, top P parameter, top K, and the list goes on and on and on. And also here, where do you want to sequence to stop? So if there's some profanity, if there's some language that I don't want to generate, I can just type it in here and it stops at that point in time. Now, the AI guardrails. This is something that's also extremely important for businesses and for everyone that's going to have the, let's say, using large language models. And we have multiple options to mitigate hate, abuse, and profanity. And these are just some of the things that are inside of WatsonX.ai. We also have more specific, more complicated tools inside the other module, which is WatsonX.governance, which I was talking about before. Okay, but essentially have a lot of tools to make sure that the models are behaving properly and that there aren't any surprises that might cause us to end up in the newspaper. Okay, so that's important. Okay, so once we're done with the prompt, we can click on save. And we can save the prompt either as a prompt template. So save the current prompt only without its history. You can save it as a prompt session with its history, or we can save it in form of a Python notebook. So I'm going to go ahead and save it as a Python notebook. So then later on, we can continue with Python if we want to do some changes. So I'm going to click on view and project after saving. I gave it a name, I gave it a description. And now it's going to take me to the part of the assets where my notebook is located. And here you can see this is no notebook with my prompt. So the notebook goal, the setup, the inference, I have a lot of comments which essentially explain what the notebook contains, defining the model ID, model parameters, model object, defining interference input and execution. So the prompt wasn't that long. It wasn't really anything at all. So this is what I got out of the things that I typed, right? But in practice, this would be a lot longer, and it would have some content in general. So let's go back to the DSC to the asset tab to see the other assets. So again, this is what I was, this is what I was showing right now. So chat and build prompts and foundational models. Then we have tune a foundation model with label data. Okay. So let's tune the model. This is prompt tuning, by the way. If we have label data and we want to change the model a bit, here I can select a foundational model. These are currently the only models that you can tune, right? But again, every month there's new, because this is a fairly new tool inside of WatsonX.ai. So we're expecting the roadmap has a lot more models to add to the table. So I just click on one flan, let's say, I click on this one. Then how do you want to initialize your prompt? I click on text, I give it an example. And here's where I add the label data I want to train the model with. Okay, and then there's a couple of more steps. And then once the model is created, you can see it in the asset tabs, and then you can use the model and train it in the prompt lab, which I showed you before. I mean, train it, test it out to see if it's working as it should be. Now, tune a foundation model with labeled data, then you can build models as a visual flow. Okay, so this is traditional machine learning. Again, you have Gen AI tools and traditional machine learning tools. So this is a platform for AI in general, not just generative AI. Okay, I'm not gonna go deeper into this, but you can have you have widgets sort of like RapidMiner for you to know, or Orange or SPSS Modeler. This is essentially a similar technology where you have a canvas and you pick different algorithms and you kind of like connect all of them together. So then you have pipeline which is ready to use. Then we have R, we have Jupyter Notebook with Python and federated learning, so on and so forth, and also automate model life cycles. We have also a canvas type of approach where we can connect different assets and automate the models. Automate the model lifecycle. So essentially, we have tools that cover the whole generative AI sphere as well as the whole MLOps lifecycle. So for preparing the data to all the way down to monitoring the data, creating the data, monitoring the model, retraining the model, and so on and so forth. Now, I promised if I had a couple of extra minutes left, which I do, I'm going to be showing you a different tool, which is also quite interesting, and it's build machine learning models automatically. Now, ever since Gen AI came out, there's been a lot of, let's say, there's been a switch when it comes to the skills that data scientists need when it comes to working with AI. And a lot of people, when I say such things such as this, they get a little bit more, I wouldn't say defensive, but they don't like the idea of future data scientists working only with prompt engineering and not knowing how to code and so on and so forth. But looks like it's going in that direction. Now, does that mean that data scientists in the future won't be able to, won't have to know how to code? I think not. They'll have to know how to code at least to a certain extent, but it's safe to say that the current data scientist knows a lot about Python, a lot more about Python compared to a data scientist in 5 years. I think there's going to be other tools which you'll be able to do a lot more things with natural language compared to you can do right now, right? So this is a traditional machine learning tool which is able to, let's say, cover that part of the issue, right? So, I mean, it's not able to cover that part, but it's mainly used for data scientists who don't have a lot of experience with Python to get them started, or let's say to just speed up the process of creating a machine learning model, and it does everything automatically. Okay, so let me give you an example. So DSC 123 is the name. I just have to give it a description, and then I click on create. So essentially, this tool automatically, all you have to give it is a data set. And I have a data set right here, which is this data set is a telco data set, and it's a data set prepared for customer churn. So predicting whether or not a customer churns or not. Okay, so I'm going to click on, so I gave it the data set. Here it asks create a time series analysis. I'm going to click on no. Then I have to pick which column inside the data set do I want it to predict. And I'm going to click on the churn column. This is the last column inside the data set, and it has a binary value. So it's either 1 if the customer did churn, or 0 if the customer didn't churn. Okay, so I'm going to click on churn. And then just based on, I'm going to click, okay, so I have other parameters. Of course, I can change, but I'm going to go with default ones. And based on the data set I gave it, and based on the column that I want to predict, it automatically selected, okay, prediction type, binary classification, and optimized for accuracy and runtime. So it picked the most accurate, let's say, metric by which it's going to evaluate it with, as well as now it's going to pick the best algorithms and transformation and enhancement. So I'm going to go ahead and run the experiment, sorry. So this is going to take a couple of minutes, and now just enjoy the ride, because this is, everything is done automatically. So here we can see this is a cute little animation, trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Give you an impression that something's working in the background, which is, right? It is. So we still have to wait. This is the time elapse, so this is going to take a couple of more minutes. Maybe I can show you where I got the data set from. So if anyone's interested in the data set that I use for this Auto AI experiment, you can go click here, customer churn on Kaggle. Then I click on data set, and this is the telco customer churn data set. It's the most, let's say, the most popular one out of the bunch. Okay. So I used that data set, just took it down from Kaggle and added it to the Auto AI experiment. So this is the let's say this is the relationship map, right? So currently there's no relationship map still because it's still processing the information. Okay, and as we can see, the data set was divided into two parts. So 90% of the data set was divided into training data, and 10% of the data set is divided into holdout data, which is going to be the data we're going to evaluate the pipelines with. Okay, so training data was threefold, something you can also change, but this is the default option. And now if we swap, this is the relationship map, by the way, so you can see the relationships, or rather, you can't see the relationships right now, but you will be able to see them in the future. And okay, so now it's selecting the algorithms. Okay, so let's just switch to the progress map real quick so we can see where our progress is. So first we read the data set, then it split the whole data, then we read the training data, then it was then it was the pre-processing part, then we had the model selection, and then it picked the first algorithm which was the best suited for the current data set. So we can see that it used snap random forest classifier, and here we have different enhancements. So hyperparameter optimization and feature engineering, and then out of every enhancement you get a pipeline. Okay, so let's switch back to the relationship map. Here we can see this is the data. Then we have the algorithms, which currently we only have the snap random forest classifier. Then we have the different pipelines and feature transformers. And this is the pipeline leaderboard. Okay, so currently we have 3 different pipelines already. The 4th one is being evaluated. And we have a snap random forest classifier algorithm. And here we have the metric by which it was evaluated. In this case is accuracy, as well as the enhancement, and so on and so forth. So once the entire thing is finished, once we get 8 different pipelines here, it's going to be ranked based on which is the most accurate. And we're going to pick the one that's the most accurate, let's say, okay? And now if we go into pipeline comparison, we can see all of these different pipelines and how they are, let's say, measured on different evaluation measurements. So from accuracy, average precision, to log loss, to precision, to recall, to ROC, AOC, so on and so forth. And yeah, okay, so essentially, you would get different pipelines here, 8 different pipelines. I'm just gonna go ahead, we're not gonna wait all the way up to the end. I'm gonna save the number 1 pipeline, which is essentially the one that's the most accurate up until now. And now I can save it either in a form of a model or in a form of a notebook. Okay, so if I save it in a form of a model, then I can just click create. You can view it in project, right? And here I have all the information when it comes to the model. This is also an extremely important part because most business, EU AI Act next year is going to demand that you have all the metadata relevant to the models that you're using. Not all of the models, but some of the models, the ones that are going to have, let's say, a higher degree of responsibility. So here we have the governance part. Again, you can promote the model to deployment space, then you can deploy the model, and then you can test the model whether or not it's working, even before you deploy it, actually. But, I think you got the understanding of how these things work. Now, considering I'm running a bit out of time, I'm just gonna go ahead and show you the slides back real quick because I want to wrap this thing up before I go into the Q&A. So let me where they have the PowerPoint. Okay. So I have a couple of slides with which I want to wrap things up, right? So the first slide is how to get started with watsonx.ai today, right? So if for someone, by the way, this was usually, it was a little bit different compared to what I usually pitch to the clients and partners, because it was mostly about showing you the functionalities. I mean, not mostly, I spent a lot of time on slides, but it wasn't as sales-ish compared to what I'm usually used to. So yeah, you gotta give me a break on that one. But how to get started with What's Next today, What's Next AI today? You know, so when I'm talking with a client, it's either if they want to test it, they can start a free trial. Okay, so either an IBM cloud and another clouds, you can test the thing out. So even for anyone here that's interested, you can, you know, either send me an email or whatever, and we can get an environment ready for you so you can test it out and all of the functionalities that I showed today. Then if a business is interested and we actually see that there's more interest, they don't know where to get started, and they want to implement something like this today, we have a client briefing, which is usually 2 to 4 hours. We exchange certain information. You know, we have experts on our part which understand what exactly they need, how to implement, and so on and so forth. Okay. And then finally, if the business is really, really interested into Gen AI, but they are not sure whether or not we can provide the value that we are putting on across, then we have the pilot program, which is essentially a free pilot program for, you know, we create a quick POC for our clients with their data to so that they can actually see the value that what IBM brings to the table, and they can see that the entire thing is really useful before they before they have to spend a dime, essentially. Okay, so usually when we create the pilot program, we finish the pilot, we finish the POC, then we start talking about, okay, the implementation, putting it to production, so on and so forth. So this is our go-to. Now, also, the last couple of words, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. So although I haven't gotten the chance to say anything on this topic, or rather, I did say a couple of things, but I didn't go into details. This is something that everyone, every business, every entity, government entity, or whatever, everyone that's trying to leverage generative AI and in the next year, in 2025, this is something that we all have to consider before implementing any AI solution, because the AI Act legislation is already in full throttle and is going to be enforced next year. And the companies that won't be in line with the legislation are, well, first, they're going to have to pay a fine. And the second, they're not going to be able to use the AI for much longer because, you know, they won't be allowed to. So this is a topic that I'm going to have the pleasure to talk about in Belgrade in a couple of months in DSC Europe. So if anyone's interested, you can go ahead and join me then, right? So this is also something I'm extremely interested in, how things are going to unfold and what the other vendors bring to the table, what type of tools are going to be developed, and how Europe is going to go in the direction where we will have AI regulated, but not to the extent with only certain actors can use it. And it's going to be an interesting next couple of years. So I think that's how I want to wrap the entire thing, the entire presentation slash demonstration up. Now, again, I'm going to leave it in the first slide. So if anyone's interested, anyone has any additional questions, you can either ask me a question right now, considering it's time for the Q&A, or you can send me an email or, you know, a message via LinkedIn, doesn't really matter. Okay, so message to the organizer, I finished the presentation. So yeah, now if anyone has any question, feel free to ask.
Okay, we can start with Q&A session. We have first question: how do you integrate unstructured data sources into Watson?
Well, there's multiple options, right? So we have the most average approach is, of course, you know, you use the retrieval augmented generation approach. But for that, you need, let's say, you need a couple of components, right? In this case, I mentioned this is the modular framework, right? So you would need watsonx.ai, which is, you know, the thing I've been talking about now. Just let me go into the, I'm going to show you real quick. So you need watsonx.ai, which is here. this is where the models are located. Then you would need the watsonx.data module, which contains the vector database, because for retrieval augmented generation, you need a vector database. And then you also have to, you would have to either create a chatbot through watsonx.assistant. So then in the end, you would get a retrieval augmented generation architecture, and you would just, the documents that you would have would be changed to embeddings, and then the embeddings would be changed to vectors, and the vectors would be stored in the vector database. But essentially, sorry about that. Essentially, you have different modules here to choose from. We have a vector database, and usually the most common approach is to use the retrieval augmented generation approach. And we have all the models all the modules rather, to have everything, let's say everything on the platform. You don't need to use any external tools. You can use, open source tools, but that's not a need. You have everything in Watson. So that's a presentation on its own, a demonstration on its own, how to build a RAG use case. So if you're interested, just hit me an email or something. We can continue the conversation.
Thank you, Erik. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, we have another question from Igor. How to do integrate example 1,000 PDFs into RAG?
Yeah, it's similar. It's a similar approach. Okay, so in this case, you might need a larger instance of, let's say, vector database. Okay, so in this case, Milvus, or a different vector database, depending on which one you're using. But the size isn't that huge of an issue. You just need a bigger instance. I'm talking about from a perspective, let's say, if you were to have the vector database on-prem, you need more resources, and on SaaS, it's also not a huge problem. You just need to pay more. But how exactly you do it, it's I'd have to show you. It's a step-by-step process, which is not really that it's not really that big of an issue. But essentially, what we usually do is we have a Python script which change the, let's say, no, I'm gonna leave it at that, because it becomes a bit too technical on that part. But yeah, hope I answered the question.
Erik, Igor
Yes.
has a question as well again. So if you agree, I would suggest also, if Igor agrees, I can allow him to talk, so he can ask you.
Sure.
Igor, does that suit you or not? You can raise your hand if that's okay with you. Okay, perfect. Okay, you have.
Hi, Erik. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so the question, without going into the very technical specific details of the Python code, I pretty understand it. It's a question about integration to the data source. Assume that we have a large database of the documents, unstructured documents. So no DB, no data warehouse. So with the numerical data, it's about unstructured data with documents, let's say process procedures, legal documents, whatever. And these documents are living, constantly changing, constantly evolving, adding new paragraphs, and they're completely different structured. So do you have do watsonx AI and watsonx.data obtain the smooth integration way of adopting these unstructured data in a large format with a regular update sourcing into your vector database? It doesn't matter what database you use, whether it's Quadrant, Milvus, whatever, PyCon, it doesn't matter. It's about a matter of integration without specifically writing a new code and doing a very expensive interface between the system holding the data.
Yeah, we have multiple tools that automate the entire process. Okay, so you can pick a time frame with which you want to, let's say, considering the documents are changing over time, right? And you want to have all the knowledge that's up to date. You can essentially pick a time frame, and then based on that time frame, the model, or let's say the retrieval augmented generation approach, is going to get updated without the slightest of changes. Okay, so it's automated, it's quite straightforward.
Mm-hmm. So, and how you would integrate that third-party system? So how you will plug the third-party system into Watson?
Well, depends on what the third-party system is. We have multiple connectors. So, whether that's a database, a dataware, whatever, we have multiple connectors to choose from. I can send you the documentation later on, or if it had anything particular in mind, I can maybe answer right now what type of data source do you currently have, or if there's some, usually when we're talking with businesses, no matter where their data is located, we can connect to it in a, let's say, usually it's not an option. It's not a problem because we have multiple connectors to choose from inside of watsonx data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so whether, I don't know, whether that's Oracle, Microsoft, it doesn't really, open source databases, usually we can handle them because usually our business, there's only a handful of databases which are used, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't have any issues so far with data source that wasn't supported.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning, we did, of course, when the entire thing was developing, it was in the first steps, but not right now. That's not an issue at all.
Mm-hmm. I would place the very last point or question. So it's mostly about unstructured data. Like, let's take the most trivial case of a SharePoint or the Microsoft. So it's a pile of documents. So so as I got from your answer, you would have a connector to SharePoint either where there is a pile of these documents in relatively unstructured manner, right?
Yes.
With a regular indexer then for them.
Yes.
Thank you.
We had a similar situation. I worked on a project not too long ago where they had one of our clients had a repository of PDF documents as well as Word documents where they had all their internal documentation of the business, and we used that as well as we scraped their web page, which was changing on the regular. So we'd use both of those data sources, and then we set it up so it would get updated, I don't know, every week or something, because it was a pilot program, it wasn't production, but that's essentially how you want to do it, right? So
thank you much.
No worries, you're welcome. By the way, Igor, if you have, you can just contact me and we can continue the conversation, offline. So if you'd like to have more information on this topic.
Thank you. I will contact you.
No worries, you're welcome. Can't hear you, Mr. DSC tutor.
I forgot to add it myself. Do we have any more questions? We have time to answer one or two more questions till the end of the webinar. Okay, let's wait for a minute if somebody's typing a question. If not, we can slowly finish this tutorial. Okay, it seems like we don't have any more questions. Erik, thank you for your great presentation. I believe everybody enjoyed this webinar as much as I did, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. And thank you once again for being part of DSC DACH this year.
Thank you very much for having me. Hopefully I wasn't too, hopefully didn't make everyone sleepy. So, thank you very much for having me. I think this is the fourth time I have a DSC presentation. So always happy to come. And see you in Belgrade in a couple of months.
Yeah, see you in Belgrade. And for the other attendees, we'll have a 15-minute break now. And after